All right, everybody. So sorry about that. We are starting a little bit later than we expected. Zoom technical difficulties. I'm hopefully people are still joining in and are still able to. We disabled the issue, so hopefully they'll start trickling in as I start with the land acknowledgement. Today, we acknowledge that the ground beneath our feet, and I am in Durango, is historically the home of Indigenous peoples. It is the ancestral lands of Puebloan, Ute tribes, and Diné who have occupied this land before colonization. The Winnetou Band are now recognized as Ute Mountain Utes, who are located in Toyac, just outside of Cortez, Colorado. And the Muachi and Caputa bands make up the Southern Ute Indian tribe of Ignacio, Colorado. Hesperus Peak, located just west of Durango, is the tallest peak in the La Plata mountain range and is identified as one of our 4 sacred mountains by Diné people. The history of these lands have been told from Western perspective without fully acknowledging the Indigenous people who occupied this land before it was La Plata County. It is imperative to know that we are living and working on stolen lands. We are here to create a peaceful environment for all and to be inclusive of history, culture, and humanity. So thank you for acknowledging the lands with me today. That was a land acknowledgement written by my colleague, Imo Suko. All right. Hello, everybody. Chelsea Nishia, Sanabitli Nishle, Sanja Kinabashichin, Ashia Dashache do Tabahan Dashnale, Bukantia Detnasha. I just introduced myself in Navajo. Whoops, we have an echo somewhere. If you could please mute yourself, everybody. Thank you. So I am the Community Health Programs Associate at Southwest Colorado Area Health Education Center. I'll also be your moderator this evening for this panel. Southwest Colorado Area Health Education Center is located in Durango, Colorado. We're a nonprofit organization, and we are focused on healthcare capacity building. We ensure that the accessibility of health-related education is available, developing pipeline programs. We also shape careers with educating events like this one. So we're really excited to have you here with us today. So thank you all for being here. I know it's the end of the day, it's dinner time, so I really appreciate your attendance. So today we have an amazing panel on Native women in nutrition, where we'll be listening to 3 different academic journeys through a nutritional science program. Their career paths, we'll be learning about their work and whatever advice they have to offer us tonight. But before we get started, I would love if everyone or some of you can go ahead and just throw into the chat box your role, your profession, who you are. Are you a mother, educator? Just for us to get a feel of who our audience is tonight. And that's okay if you don't want to. Awesome. We thank you, Marnie, for being here. Some registered nurse, Artie, awesome. Cool, thank you so much. All right, so our goal here today is amplifying Indigenous voices and representation in health careers, such as nutrition. And whatever role or profession you represent, my hope here this evening is that you'll come away with something new, whether that be inspiration, fresh perspective, new networks, or maybe just you needed that boost this evening to get you through school and to finish out the week. So my hope is that that's a big takeaway for you tonight. What to expect? The panelists will start by introducing themselves, and then we're jumping right into 3 panel questions for the next hour. And then we'll leave some time at the end for questions, comments, conversation. And then in the meantime, if you have questions that you want to throw in the chat box, feel free to do that. And towards the end of the panel, we'll go ahead and get to those questions. And even if the panel does end a little bit sooner with all our panelists speaking, my hope is that there's some conversation that generates from this. So all right, I hope that sounds good to everybody. Let's get started, and we will go ahead and start with introductions that I will, let's see, Alvina, would you like to start us off with a brief introduction?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm already thinking ahead to the weekend. Alvina bigay and shiat khatni sahnin and shlan chanjikina e bashichin khobaha da shichegran e dashanala ekot atinastan and shlan. My name is Alvina Bigay. I was born and raised in Ganado, Arizona. That's where I grew up, and I lived in Flagstaff, where I was a professional runner for many years. And then the last 3 years, I've been living in Saheli, Arizona with my family. And I currently work as a nurse at the Saheli Health Center. And I also work part-time at the DaVita Dialysis Center in Chinle as their registered dietitian. I am a former professional runner with Nike. I still run a lot. I have a daughter. Her name is Yithnaba Johnson, and my significant other is Casey Johnson. And he works with the college, and he's also running for council delegate for the Western Agency, or the western part of the reservation. So yeah, we're busy and we're working, and we have big goals and we're chasing them. And that's me in a nutshell. Thank you.
Nay, would you like to go next?
Okay, now we're good. So, hello everyone. My name is Danae Bex. I am Nanashtaja Tachini, which is Red Running Into the Water. And I am Coyote Pass Clan, which is Maidesh Gijni. I'm Tkodachitni, and I'm Kia Ani. So I am a Navajo registered dietitian, and I am so happy you can join us. I'm so happy everyone can join us, because I know what it takes out of us when it's the end of the day and to log into a Zoom session. So I really appreciate it. I am here just to talk about my journey. I've been a dietitian for 4 years. I work at a local reservation hospital on the Navajo Nation. And recently I also started up a company called Tumbleweed Nutrition back in 2021. And the goal of the company is to connect Indigenous food and community and nutrition, and kind of destigmatize a lot of nutrition education that's in our communities, and just to make sure that our community knows that, whatever they're eating is okay, but there's ways we can kind of make it a little bit healthier. We can always add to it. And I always come from that viewpoint, instead of trying to take away our traditional foods from our community, because they're very important for us physically and mentally, and also spiritually. So that's one of the things I do. I work with tribal organizations to kind of do consultant work. And I also work with local farms to kind of highlight the importance of our building a strong native food system. And I'm a huge believer that a strong native food system is going to be what's going to help improve our health as a people. And I think it's just going back to, the principles that we had with food. So that's what I am. That's what I do.
Cynthia?
Yeah, Yate, Shay Cynthia Wilson, Yinchia, Bitani, Nishlol, Kenyani, Bashishin, Kachitni, A Dashiche, Ado, Kinchachitni, A Dashinella, Tebin Zids, Gadan, Shiaho, Do, Gian Ben, Antinigi, A Shinanish. I'm originally from Monument Valley, Utah, but I went to high school in Kayenta, so go Mustangs. And I went to school at Southern Utah University, majoring in nutrition. And then I went to University of Utah, Master of Science program, majoring in nutrition education, which was actually a dietetic program specifically for that. But my current title is being a student again, a graduate student. So after getting my Master of Science degree, I did 6 years of community work with the Bears Ears National Monument Advocacy as a former Traditional Foods Program Director for Utah Denebikea. So right now I am a first-year PhD student in Environmental Science Policy and Management under the Society and Environment Division with UC Berkeley. So I moved to the Bay Area, continuing research in food sovereignty work. So yeah, that's who I am and where I'm at right now. And I'm looking forward to sharing more with the panelists.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for agreeing to do this, being a part of this panel. I really appreciate it. When I had reached out to Danae, Cynthia, and Elvina, I'm like, like unicorns, they're like native dietitians are rare to find. So I was happy to find, at least 3 of them. So before we really dive into some of the work that each of you do, could you go ahead and talk a little bit about your journey to becoming a registered dietitian? And Danae, we'll go ahead and start with you. Oh, and you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to share my journey, talking about nutrition and how I got into nutrition and my journey to becoming a dietitian. So I didn't really have a straightforward path getting into school or deciding to become a dietitian. I actually didn't think I was ever going to be a dietitian for a number of reasons. So I went to school at Arizona State University. And for like the first 2 years, I kind of just puttered around and tried to figure out what I had a passion for. I knew that I had a passion for nutrition. I knew that I liked talking about food and gardening and growing our own food and talking about nutrition, but I didn't really know how to apply that to school, because when I grew up in Chinle High School, or when I grew up in Chinle, I didn't know being a dietitian was an actual career path. Like nobody ever talked about it. I knew like people went into nursing. I knew people went into like public health or to be dental assistants, but I didn't know it was an option. So that's kind of why I think I took my time, those 2 years, to figure out what I wanted to do. And then my advisor had mentioned that there was this dietetics degree that kind of integrated a lot of things I was interested in, like food service management, community nutrition. Those things like just make me so happy. So eventually I, went through all the classes, definitely was not prepared about the rigorous study. I wasn't prepared for that. I just felt like I was so behind in all my chemistry classes, like organic chemistry, biochemistry, biophysiology. I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? And anyway, failed a couple of classes, probably more than a couple. And I graduated in 2011. And so in 2011, that was when I was like, I'm done with nutrition and dietitian. I'm going to go get some experience in like another health field. And I spent 3 years as a diabetes health coach for Chinle Hospital. And I don't know, I always went back to food. I always went back to that passion that I had when I was at the hospital. I enjoyed talking to the dietitians that were there about nutrition. So that was kind of my path to getting back to nutrition and dietetics. And I'll try to make it shorter, but I could talk forever about my whole story, my whole journey. It's like very windy road. And I knew that my grades were not going to be up to par. So I decided that I'll go back to school, get my master's in public health. And the emphasis was community health education. And that's actually how it helped me get into an internship, was that I showed through my MPH that I was capable of rigorous study. And to make a long story short, I got into an internship, second round actually. So I'm just saying, like, be persistent, because, you know, if I was able to do it, then I'm sure anybody else can do it. So that was my story.
Yeah, awesome, Danae. Yeah, just to let people know, and when you are becoming a registered dietitian, and correct me if I'm wrong, Danae, that you have to sit for that exam to be accredited, that RD title, because anybody could be a nutritionist, but the studies there.
To become a dietitian. So at the time, you needed a 4-year degree in nutrition and dietetics. And then you would have to apply for a 1,200-hour internship. And that was very competitive, which is why I didn't think I was going to get in, like my first shot coming out of ASU. And then once you get done with that internship, which had the clinical, food service, and community aspects, then you sit for, I think it's like a 3 or 4 hour exam. And so that's how you become a dietitian, because anybody can be called a nutritionist, and that's not legally regulated. But to be a dietitian, that actually gives you a lot more flexibility. There's a lot of things you could do, but also in hospital services, that allows you to bill for services too.
Thank you for emphasizing on that. Alvina, let's kick it off to you. Let's hear about your journey to becoming a registered dietitian.
Yeah. So being a runner has been a huge part of my life. And that's pretty much what led me to becoming a registered dietitian. I was on the cross country team and track team at Arizona State University. And while there, I pretty much took my time in deciding what I would major in. And I think it was getting down to that deadline to when I had to choose. And I remember taking a nutrition class with Carol Johnson. That was the instructor's name, and she taught nutrition. And she was, what I remember about her was that she did a lot of studying on vitamin C. And I really liked the way that she taught nutrition. And I felt like she, I talked to her after classes, and she encouraged me to go into the nutrition dietetics field. So that was how I got interested in going into dietetics. So, but like Danae, I struggled with the sciences, the chemistry, the biochemistry, all of the chemistry, the organic chemistry. They were all nightmare classes for me, and I struggled, and honestly, I don't know how I passed. I somehow passed those classes, and looking back, and I'm just really glad I got through them. And the rest of the classes were fine, but those classes really sunk my GPA. And because I was an athlete with ASU, I had the help of the I guess the athletics department in terms of them helping me get tutors and tutoring services and just any help I could get. And because those services were available to me, I really took advantage of them. So I'm really grateful to the ASU and their athletic program for providing me with tutors, because I don't know how I would have passed some of those classes if I didn't have that help. But yeah, so that was pretty much how I started. And pretty much when you're a runner, and for me, I've always had really high athletic goals, especially in running. Nutrition, it plays a huge part in that. As a runner, you want to be as fast as you can, and you look for things that you can do to improve performance. And nutrition definitely plays a big part in that. And that played a huge part in me wanting to study nutrition more and how to learn more about foods I could eat to get faster. So that played a huge part in me going into nutrition. And then my mom is a nurse. She's been a nurse for many years, and I grew up around doctors and nurses and physical therapists. And I remember them always talking about the need for, registered dietitian and nurses. And there was always that, you can come home to the reservation if you go into the health field. That was also something that sparked an interest that, if I go into the health, have a job near home. That was something that was also important for me. But as far as studying and being in nutrition and being a full-time college athlete, it was there was very little time for fun, especially when you're trying to pass those hard science. So a lot of times what I remember doing is getting up super early in Phoenix because it was so hot to run any other time of the day, and then just spending my Saturdays and Sundays in the library from like 9 to 5. And that's something that I did every weekend that I was in Phoenix. And I felt like that was really helpful to just put myself in an environment where I could just focus on my studies. And that was something that really helped me. But yeah, that's pretty much how I got started. And yeah.
And now she's a nurse.
Yeah, I can talk about that part later.
Yeah. Thank you, Alvina. A lot of your work and just growing up, seeing you on big poster boards, it's really awesome that you've joined us here tonight and are willing to share your story. So thank you. Cynthia, you're next. If you could just go ahead and share your journey, but yours is a little bit different. You didn't chose not to sit for the RD exam, and you're continuing education. So if you could share your journey through the nutritional science curriculum, and I guess from there.
Yeah. So I had similar experiences. While I went to my graduate program, was an accredited program, a 2-year master's program, with the summers that provided time for our thesis and also our internship sites. And so after graduating, I went straight to nonprofit work. I'm eligible to take the registered dietitian exam, but it's very comprehensive. It really touches on every aspect of food science, nutrition, food management, and even like calculating for hospital patients. And that part has always been challenging to me, the calculations, and just want to also add that I did my undergrad in nutrition, but it wasn't accredited at Southern Utah University. And I struggled with the heavy sciences, and I took 5 years in my undergraduate program because of like getting D's in my science classes, and also I even got an F in my first try at organic chemistry. So after graduating, I wanted to continue. I really wanted to get accepted at the dietetic master's program. So I took some classes to retake those organic chemistry and biochemistry and got better grades. I got B's and eventually got accepted into the program, which only accepts about 12 to 14 graduate students per year. So it's very competitive. But what got me interested in nutrition was taking my very first nutrition class as a junior in undergraduate. I've never came across a nutrition class like what I never knew about vitamins, coming from Monument Valley, a very remote community that doesn't always have the privilege of such classes or teachings into where we come from. And a lot of these teachings and sciences reminds me of what my grandpa has been emphasizing. And my grandpa was well-known medicine man in our community, and just hearing his teachings of life and of plants, of medicine in existence, and our connection to our native plant systems and how we act responsibly as earth surface beings. Him as a healer, and even like my mom as an herbalist, I never like connected nutrition to that, but I always wanted to do something in healthcare, but not directly like having to deal with blood or direct contact with people in a clinical setting. So nutrition seemed like a good fit. But all in all, I really realized thinking back that I really struggled with Western sciences in academia. And what really helped me is when I came back home, after receiving all my education, that the knowledge actually comes from my home, from my mom, and from the elders of my community. My thinking of nutrition shifted from what are we eating to who are we eating? Who is this plant being? What gifts and power does this plant being have? Why is the place where the plant being is living important to how we act as earth surface being, and what's our responsibility to engage with this plant being as a medicine, as a food, as a being that gifts us with many tools, whether it's prayer sticks, basket weaving. It has many purposes, and it really shifted my view of food from a broader perspective, from even like the cosmology of it, connection, and the ecology, and how we are all interconnected in that way. So since everything I've learned in my school is actually, and I also realized like when I moved back home, our priorities were different. I realized my place of work is not in a clinical setting, like doing repetitive teachings. I went directly into nonprofit work, like teaching, learning, mainly starting to listen to my elders. And I realized the priorities are different in my community, which is really all about our basic access to our basic human rights, which is water. How can we have access to clean water when we come from a community of like uranium contamination, when we come a community of lack of water access for growing our own foods? So policy came a big, seems like it came of importance to implement change with the decision makers, because we come from tribal government system, yet we're still state residents, and yet we're still under the federal government. So there's a political challenge And now that's why I decided to go back to school feeling more confident about what the needs are of my community and where the injustices are and how the environment is related. Climate justice and activism is all tied into that. So how do I elevate the knowledge coming from our people and to implement policy change so that we have access to our ancestral lands for traditional hunting, for our medicines, for our arts, for water. So all of that started to unpack when listening to my community. But in the educational system, it's been very challenging for me to feel supportive as a student because only about 1% of Native Americans are licensed as registered dietitians, and most registered dietitians are white women, and there's very lack of diversity. Yet I pushed it through. I went through the whole school, and yet when I came back home, realized more shifting towards a policy side of things than the actual dietetic work. So I can share more about that later.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you, Cynthia. I think you really you brought in that conversation that we're not just talking about nutrition. It's like policy, water access, food access, like a lot of, social determinants of health that exist in our communities. So thank you for briefly touching on that. And so the next question, we'll go ahead and start us off. Alvina, if you could go ahead and tell us about the work that you currently do, or highlight some of those accomplishments and also just previous work completed, all of that good stuff. Putting you on the pedestal.
Yeah, so I just passed the NCLEX, so I am currently working as a registered nurse in SWCAHEC in the outpatient clinic. But before I became a nurse, I worked with Flagstaff Medical Center for over 10 years, and I did a lot of patient education there. And because a lot of our Navajo patients get flown or transported out from the reservation hospitals off reservation, we would, in Flagstaff Medical Center where I worked at, would get a lot of the patients from the reservation. So there, being the only Navajo dietitian, I was able to help with some Navajo translation. I'm not fluent by any means, but I can understand Navajo well, and I think I can carry a Navajo conversation decently, or Navajo, my elders can understand what I'm saying. So I did that, and then sometimes I would educate staff on some of just some traditional foods, or just some of the Navajo mindset of food, just so there was some cultural sensitivity there. So that's one thing I helped with at Flagstaff Medical Center. I do have some experience with tube feeds and TPNs. So there, when I worked at Flagstaff Medical Center, I really felt like I was, as a dietitian, really representing Navajo people and, advocating for them. So that was I don't know, I feel really good about the work that I did there, and how I feel like I was able to make an impact as a Navajo woman, and especially as a Navajo dietitian. And then I decided to go back to nursing school. And while I was in nursing school, I worked, I got a job with DaVita Dialysis in Chinle, Arizona. And there I got experience in the renal nutrition field. And that is completely different than the work the type of nutrition work I was doing at Flagstaff Medical Center. There, was a lot more education on trying to keep renal lab values in goal range. And so there was a lot of education, trying to get patients on nutrition, high protein supplements, and a lot of working with family members, because on the Navajo reservation, or even just in general, a lot of our elders are taken care of by family members. So with that, it's a lot of educating and talking to family members about, what to feed a patient, and educating them on what high protein foods they can eat, and to take the binders. So that's the type of work I did there. Yeah, and then once I passed my NCLEX, I moved on to just doing more nursing work, more hands-on, drawing blood, giving vaccines. But still, even in the nursing field, I'm working as a dietitian, giving education on the diabetic diet. So, regardless of being a nurse, I still feel like, I'm still doing a lot of diet education. But that's the type of work I've done. I've also done some consulting work with some pro athletes. I did some online coaching for a little bit, where I was coaching athletes, and I still do a little bit of that on the side. If some runners or athletes need some help with, getting more iron into their diets, or just trying to eat better for performance. So I guess I've dabbled in a little bit of everything, and that's been really good. But one thing that I really appreciate, and I really enjoy, and I love doing, is conversing with the Navajo elders. And I feel like that's one thing that my DaVita dialysis job did for me, was it really connected me back. I felt like I needed to put more effort into learning my language, so I could converse better. So that's been really good, and just making those kinship connections with elders. And I feel like, when our elders, when I call the women Shema, or the elderly men Shache, I feel like they appreciate that, and they embrace, and they take anything that I say to them, the teachings, they take it seriously, and they try to implement those teachings into their daily lives. But that's a little bit of what I've been doing, and just mostly just really trying to use my education and my degrees, and helping my Navajo people, Diné people.
Wow, she said a little bit of what she's doing. That's a lot. Thank you, Alvina. That's a lot of really impactful and powerful work that you're providing our communities and our people. So thank you. Diné, would you like to go next? Tell us a little bit about the work you do.
Where do I start? It's lots. I feel like an octopus at times, and like currently I'm actually on another reservation. I'm doing a keynote speech tomorrow at a farmer's market, a native farmer's market. So like, I'm like in the middle of preparing my speech. I got most of it done. So, but let me just go over some accomplishments that I've kind of drafted a little bit, and then I'll get to my work that I do with farmers. So the first accomplishment is that I actually became a dietitian. So like I said, I had many times where I just bawled my tears out, thinking I was never going to be a dietitian, because it is so competitive. And I remember like one time I was like crying so hard, my husband had to like go on the side of the road and be like, "Are you okay?" And so, yeah, I think like every day I go into work, I feel very privileged to be able to not only bring my knowledge to my patients, but also be able to talk to an interdisciplinary team and have a certain level of respect when I talk to them, when I come in with my recommendations. And so I think that's a huge honor. And so I've been working 4 years as a clinical dietitian on a reservation hospital. I will tell you now, I consider that in itself an accomplishment, because as Cynthia had mentioned, clinical dietetics is rough. And when I became a dietitian, I was like, I am not going to stay in clinical more than 2 years. 2 years. I am capping out at 2 years. And the pandemic happened. And so I got my registration near the end. I'm like, okay, what's my next step? What's the next thing I'm going to look for? I attempted to kind of look at community nutrition positions, and then the pandemic hit, and then I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm staying here. I guess I'm going to stay in this position. And during that time, I was able to coordinate different departments to help deliver food to some of our highest risk malnourished patients and some of our elders. That was a privilege to kind of go to people's homes and take food to them when we were just in the rough of it and the cases were climbing. And so that was an interesting time. And now that things are starting to settle down, that's kind of where I started going back to my passion of working with the community, working with families, working with farmers. And so that's kind of why I started the company last year, which is called Tumbleweed Nutrition. And really the goal for that, like I had mentioned, is to work with support farmers in the work that they do in the way that I can. And the way I can do that is provide dietitian services and those evidence-based services to these farmers and all that. So let's see. So I only know of one other Native RD who has like a nutrition education consulting company. So if you guys know of any, let me know, because I always love to network. I always love to talk with other dietitians who are Native or serve Native communities in a culturally humble way. I think it's very important to make sure any education we provide to our community is very understandable and relatable, because like Cynthia had mentioned, we know 85% of dietitians identify as white female. That's what the CDR says. The CDR is, somebody correct me, I should probably know this, but the CDR says that, and less than 0.5% of dietitians identify as Native. And so I think it's really important to bring that representation, because when I'm able to talk to my patients about, what happens, when they go to a ceremony, what are the foods they're going to eat to make sure their blood sugars don't spike up. And I'm able to talk about, what do you do at like graduation, and what do you do at all these family functions? What do you do when you're going to go butcher sheep and you're worried about your blood sugar? I'm most proud of, I can say, is that I'm able to talk to my patients on their level. Because a lot of times, like I said, a lot of dietitians who come and work for our community, like, I think there's this assumption that we have higher health literacy skills and literacy skills. And so it's we're talking to patients about glucose, and we're talking to patients about, all these carbohydrates and protein, and it's very complicated for patients, because a patient can't even tell like the difference between a gallbladder and a kidney. So how am I supposed to talk to them about their pancreas, becoming, or their body becoming insulin insensitive, And so I integrate a lot of hands-on activities when I talk to patients, because we're, kinesthetic learners. We like to see things. And I think, honestly, everybody learns that way, regardless of race. It's just easier to see things. That's why TikTok exists, is because it's like all video. And so that's why it's so popular, is because it's video. You see things, we identify more with videos. So I think that's what I'm most proud of, is my ability to meet my patients where they're at. And not like shame them for, foods that the reason why they're eating it is because they can only afford that. And so, I've had a lot of patient interactions where like patients would cry with me because they're like, I've never heard of any healthcare provider tell me that it's okay to eat fry bread. It's okay to eat blue corn mush, because those are very important cultural foods. And my like, I will not be a dietitian who tells people to stop eating those foods because we identify with it very strongly. And, you know, a lot of people have different opinions about fry bread, but it is a cultural food, and I do not think it is appropriate to take cultural foods away from people. And so that's kind of where I come from. I also, like throughout my years as a dietitian and diabetes health educator, I also had the privilege of learning and practicing motivational interviewing. So I actually do trainings for my coworkers and colleagues on motivational interviewing and trauma-informed care, which is another wing of my business as well. And actually, I think I'm going to be working with a university soon about trying to develop curriculum for medical students next year. So I'm kind of like all over the place. You know, I like doing talking about professional development, but I also just like talking to patients, because when a patient's in my office, I'm like totally zoned in on what they need. And that's something that I feel is a real accomplishment. And I think that that's something I'm most proud of. Did they answer everything?
All of the above. Thank you, Danae. That's awesome. You're doing such wonderful work. I really appreciate you sharing that. Cynthia, will you go ahead and talk a little bit about the work that you're currently doing, or also those accomplishments, highlight previous, present, you name it.
One thing I forgot to mention related to my nutrition educational journey is that summer research internship program really helped me get into my Master of Science program in nutrition. So I did a Native American summer research internship at the University of Utah, which opened many doors of like presenting at conferences and traveling, and pairing me up with mentors. I think having a mentor, and I like how they also paired us up with a cultural mentor in the community who is also a health professional, that gave some motivation into this biomedical science and health field, and also paired us with a mentor in research department. So I did a laboratory research and also a clinical research study to strengthen my application into the dietetic program. But my work, I founded Utah Nebuchadnezzar's traditional foods program, and it was very much driven by listening to the elders and knowledge holders. I did over 30 elder interviews, and I also did a listening tour throughout the Four Corners region of Indigenous farmers doing food sovereignty work on the ground, and hearing what challenges they face, what opportunities exist, and where are the priorities of the community, and especially as they relate to our ancestral lands, access to Bears Ears area, which is public land, but historically a region where tribes had lived since time immemorial, and what the challenges are there. And I really realized a lot of this work. And for example, I can talk about the tiny Four Corners potato. It's an ancestral food that is the size of a dime, that grows throughout the Four Corners region, including like Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante. The scientific name is Selenium jamesii, and researchers found an old grinding stone from an archaeological site. They collected potato starch residue on the old grinding stone, and eventually it was a wild potato that dated back 11,000 years, which actually shows that our people have been eating these ancestral foods over many generations, and the seeds still exist today because of them, because of their stewardship practices on these lands that are now managed by BLM and US Forest Service. So how do we reclaim those ancestral foods that we have to drive across the river on public lands to harvest? So that potato nutrition content in itself has double the protein, zinc, and manganese, and triple the iron and calcium content. So it's a superfood that when I talk to the elders, they have a cultural memory of the potato that they used to harvest it for medicinal purposes, and they identify it as a life-way medicine. And the way it's translated is and when I really think about our language and how it's very much connected to how we communicate with our non-human relatives and connect with the natural world around us, because when you unpack Numasiyaja, just like what Alvina was saying about how she communicates to the elderly patients as Shamasana or Shama. When my mom calls me her child, she says Shiyaja. And it's a very powerful word. Yaja means like my little one, my nurturing child. And when I think about that, the potato, the tiny potato, Numasiyaja, is like that same relation to this plant being that has been here for since time immemorial, and it's also native to North America, and it's very drought resistant. It can stay under the ground for up to 8 to 10 years, depending on the monsoon rainfall season. And that potato itself shows how much we've already always known as Indigenous people, especially as it relates to ancestral lands. And a reason, it's a model example of co-management, why we need access to continue stewarding these lands and these areas to speak for these plant relatives and medicines, so that damages from off-roads or recreational areas don't impact these spaces. And then when I think about diabetes, like I come from a family that was very a strong history of diabetes, and I think about the different knowledge system that our elders grew up with compared to what we were brought up with in the colonial society, of the different concept of food and how that impacted, and how our lands were taken away from us, disconnected us from our ancestral foods and water. How that also relates to the numbers that we see in high rates of diabetes, cancer because of the extractive industries, and cardiovascular disease. So I think back about the elders and how they used to view food. I think about, like, if we were to talk to our elders, like from the Western perspective, you would, when we're thinking about diabetes, like corn and potato are often high starch foods that could potentially raise your blood sugar levels. Whereas if we were to talk about this tiny potato, and if we were to talk about indigenous corns that are cooked with like ash and in a way that takes the protein out of that, I mean, in the way that adds the protein to it, like these traditional cooking methods incorporated into the way they prepare food is very much different health concept and teaching. So there's like a, and I even think about our taste buds. How did our taste buds shift from today, from our ancestral taste buds to how our taste is more accommodated to sugar nowadays, because it shifted. So listening to my elders and knowledge holders really helped me better see the Indigenous lens of how we view food, how we view medicines and plants, and why we need to use our voice as Earth surface beings to protect them, and so that we can reclaim those foods for reclaiming our health. And that's one of, to me, a big accomplishment, is having that privilege to have that knowledge and to reclaim our ancestral foods.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cynthia. You know, I think when I first asked each speaker to be involved in this was because of the range we have here. Like we have Alvina, who's a clinical dietitian, or who's in the clinical setting, and Danae, who's taken the entrepreneurship route and, you know, starting her business, and then thinking about Cynthia, who has done work in food sovereignty, and also including the environment into this equation. So it's really, really cool to just see the span and how like this field of nutrition can take you to. So thank you for sharing that. So to wrap up our panel with closing questions, what advice or strategies do you have for our listeners here today? Cynthia, I'll go ahead and jump back to you and start us off with this question.
Yeah, I think looking back at my educational career, even though I'm still continuing it, I think the biggest advice is like, listen to the wisdom of your elders. Let's ask questions about your parents, what foods they used to eat, how were they prepared, and the knowledge from the home. Like I realized everything, the foundations of our knowledge comes from our home, from our hogan, from the fire, from the elements that make up who we are as humans. It's sometimes we take for granted that knowledge that exists within our home, and we often think that we often think that we have to live the Western ways, like to fulfill Western education to have a life in society is the way into making a life. But the way I see it is I come to full circle when I go back home and with those teachings. And also I think what helped is taking a break from like consistently going to school, and having that work experience on the ground really helped shape who I am. My work in a graduate program gives me a better sense of my next steps, which is how can we think about like Indigenous epistemology, ontology, Indigenous pedagogy, and Indigenous ethnoecology as a model to use to intellectually engage Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and existing, so that it can be integrated into policy change, because it's hard for outside groups to understand where we come from the traditional lens, but how can we engage and make an influence to the outside decision makers from an intellectual lens. So that's kind of where I'm at now. And overall, having that mentorship and strong connections is kind of where I'm at today. Is now at Harvard campus. I'm actually a Native and Indigenous Rights Teaching Fellow for Harvard Divinity School, bringing some of my lived experience and work through my advocacy work And yeah, that's, I'll
Oh, thank you,
leave it at
Cynthia.
that.
Yes, I appreciate that. And we'll go on to Alvina. Any advice or strategies for our listeners here today? I hope you got a glimpse of what that list looked like, of who our listeners are, but
Okay. For me, just a couple of things, when I think back about school and, going through those really difficult times, especially the really hard classes, looking back now, I would tell other students with maybe just not like science classes, but with anything that they're struggling with is to utilize your resources. I think some campuses have tutor programs, and I would say really look out for those resources and don't be afraid to ask for help. I know that if I didn't ask for help, I wouldn't have been able to do a lot of the things that I've done. I'm not afraid to ask for help, and I know that you're going to get a lot of your questions answered. You're going to get help in ways that you couldn't even imagine by just speaking up and saying, okay, I don't understand this, I need some help. So just being vulnerable and just not being afraid to ask for help will take you a long way. And just not giving up. With the NCLEX, I took it 3 times before I passed. And, and I'm really glad I didn't give up. I'm really glad that I didn't give up and get discouraged, with some of the biochemistry classes that I failed in college, and even though some classes or some college or any situation that gets hard, I would just encourage people to not give up. And also, from the clinical, for my clinical setting, I would just tell, other professionals that work with Native American people to think about what they tell their patients and what they feed their patients. What comes to mind is when I worked at Flagstaff Medical Center, our kitchen thought it would be a really great idea to add protein powder to our blue corn mush. And, that sounds really good, but then our Navajo patients wouldn't eat the blue corn mush because the high protein powder just tasted so yucky. So they wouldn't even touch the blue corn. And then, with the high protein shakes, like the Boost and the Glucerna, those sound really good to give to patients and seem like there'd be a quick fix, but a lot of our patients are lactose intolerant or they say it's too sweet. So, a lot of these supplements and things that sound really great, a lot of them they do sound great, but they don't taste that great. And I would just encourage, healthcare professionals listening to just, maybe taste what they're feeding patients and looking into that a little bit more, and then looking into other options, along with what Danae said about, just because some of our cultural foods are not the healthiest, it doesn't mean that we tell our patients to completely eliminate it or take it away. Because I feel like I find that in situations where that's happened, it actually just makes the patients want it more, and then they eat it more, and we wonder why their blood sugars are so high. But that's some of the advice that I would give. And then also, I think one thing that I've run into as a dietitian is that just because I'm a dietitian, people think that I'm a super healthy eater, and then they have to watch what they eat in front of me, and that's not the case for some of us. People who know me know for a fact that I'm not the best, healthiest dietitian eater. But yeah, I would say just don't hold some of us dietitians to that super high healthy eating standard. But that's just some of the advice that I would give. I think the big thing is just don't give up and just ask for help. Life in school is hard. I can say that at 42, and I still ask for help, and it still does wonders for me. So that's all I wanted to share. Thank you.
thank you, Alvina. Today, go ahead and take it away.
Alrighty. Cynthia and Alvina had such great answers. I probably would have said the same thing. So I'm trying to like think, what else did they not say? They had such good answers. So advice, I think for all levels, for youth, students, faculty, I think I'd have advice for different people depending on what situation they're in. But for youth and students, I think when you're thinking about your career or you're considering a career in nutrition or dietetics, kind of always go back to your why. And I even tell that with my own patients, is kind of understand what motivates you and what's going to keep you going. Because when those hard classes come, as all of us had mentioned, we're gonna feel really disappointed and we're gonna feel upset or frustrated. And I think it's important to understand that to have compassion for yourself when those times come, and then also ask yourself, why am I getting into this? Why does it matter to me? And I think that goes a long way to kind of give you motivation again, because I remember, sitting in those chemistry classes and sitting in some other, hardcore science classes. I would always not always, but I would compare myself to some of my classmates and think, wow, why are they so smart? And I think I was really hard on myself because I didn't have access to the resources those other students had. And I think that brings up a lot of issues of privilege and power. And I think it's important to also have compassion for yourself, because, I grew up in a family of 7 and we lived in poverty. We lived on $15,000 a year, and I didn't have access to tutors at Chinle High School. I didn't have access to all these other things. I was worried about, some family dynamic situations. And it's important to have compassion for yourself, and to make sure you're not, being too hard on yourself, because when we're really hard on ourselves, we find it really difficult to keep going. And it's the same for when I talk to patients as well. When we're upset that we chose fries instead of a carrot, we really are hard on ourselves, and that's like, we can't grow from shame. And that's something I tell patients, is that we can't improve ourselves, or we can't develop ourselves if we always give ourselves a harsh talk, or if we're always mad at ourselves. Like, that doesn't happen. And so that's something I would say to students. As far as and I was looking at the chat too, and I really want to answer some of these chat questions, but I don't know if I should wait. But
yeah, let me just say, read it.
That weaves into some of the questions too.
If you want to just read it and then go ahead and answer it.
Okay, so some of the questions were about building an inclusive dietetics program, and how do we recruit natives or indigenous people to join the profession of dietetics. And so I think it's very important that indigenous representation matters, which is why I wanted to be part of this panel, was because we get to see actual indigenous dietitians and nutrition professionals working in our communities, doing the things that we have passion for. And it's very enlightening for students to see that. I never saw a native dietitian until I actually worked at Chinle Hospital. That's how rare we are. And I didn't see any in school. No, even during like the culture and food class that they have. All I learned about if I were non-native and I didn't know anything about native food, all I learned about would be that, oh, indigenous people eat berries and acorns. So I would encourage programs and not just dietetics, but all medical professional programs to start to hire people of color who represent different ethnicities or racial backgrounds, or any background really, And also to make sure that we're also including those voices to speak on behalf of when that topic comes up. Because when I had, I'll tell you a true story. When I talked, I remember clearly, and I think I'm still traumatized from this. I got into a conversation with one of my professors. I think there was a question on the exam about like, are Native Americans sovereign? And then I guess the answer was true. And I was just like, like a lot of like gray in that question. And I don't think we can cut it down to like a binary choice, like a black or white choice. And I was trying to explain that to her because really I was just trying to get a point because I put false. and she still said, no, it's true. And I was like, okay, well, never mind. I'm going to go home now. So it really didn't open up those conversations. So I think it's important to open up those conversations and to allow these, being more inclusive and allowing people of different backgrounds to talk about their own experiences. So that's kind of my answers for students. And that's kind of what I'm talking with the university. I'm going to start working with next year about in developing their curriculum for medical students, because the program that I'm working with is for rural and underserved areas. And so that's something that I think is very important, is to make sure those voices are heard, and that to bring real life examples and to show that this isn't just a community far off, on the other side of the world. It's a community that's literally an hour away from you, and these people live real lives and they're complicated, and we need to respect that. I think that's very important, is that we need to respect that all these communities are still humans at the end of the day, and we need to have compassion for that. So I could go like on a soapbox about this because it gets me really fired up. Because that's kind of what I am. Is first, I always feel like I'm an educator. That's something my number one passion is being an educator. That's something I enjoy doing. I enjoy making, delivering information in ways that are a little bit more creative. And then second, I feel like I'm an advocate for our community. And there was a quote that I read by Maya Angelou, and I always think about it. And it was, so Maya Angelou said, I learned a long time ago, the wisest thing I can do is be on my own side, be an advocate for myself and others like me. And that's what drives me in the work that I do, is because I was on the other end of that shame spiral. I was on the other end of not feeling good enough. And so I think it's very important that, we fight for our community.
Thank you, Danae. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to add to that.
It's Alvina. This would be what my thoughts on the question: what suggestions do you have to better recruit Native Americans to join the profession of nutrition and dietetics? One thought comes to mind would be maybe getting some staff on board, or teaching some of the courses who are Native American or who have some experience working with Native Americans. We have a dietitian here at SWCAHEC Health Center. He's an interesting man. He's a male dietitian, so I just think that sometimes if you have a male dietitian in the field, they're a little bit odd already. But this guy is pretty cool. He has some really interesting ideas about how he thinks eating some fermented foods would be a little bit good and healthy for the diet. And he thinks that we have some interesting conversations, but, I think just getting some staff on board who have experience working with Native Americans, and even just getting some Native Americans on staff would be helpful in the profession of nutrition dietetics. And I know there's some nurses who are also teachers too that might be able to help in that. That's the only question that I see, but that's one question that, I mean, that's something that I have in mind. As far as like, you know, sparking an interest, I think just sparking an interest too, that, you know, there's such a field as in nutrition to young high school students would also be a good start. You know, I in high school, I didn't even know what a dietitian was. I didn't know that there were actually professionals that worked in the nutrition field. And I think just, you know, as some of us who work in the nutrition field would, you know, spark that interest in young people, I think that would be helpful as well. So those are just some of my thoughts on that. So.
All right, thank you, panelists. We're just gonna leave the remaining like 5 minutes open to any questions. If you wanna go ahead and unmute yourself or and turn on your camera to ask our panelists any questions.
Hello, my name is Jill White. I'm with the World Critical Dietetics Organization and also Professor Emeritus from Dominican University, where I was the director of a dietetic internship program. In any case, I wanted to say thank you so much for all your input and your information. I think we're at a critical time in our field where there really needs to be a lot of motion and a movement around bringing more people who have been marginalized into the field. And it's really a time to challenge the status quo. So I thank you so much for all the information you brought. I wish that we could have a course, you know, in every dietetics program about, you know, traditional foods, the relationship between foods and ecology and so on, that the experiences that you all have shared. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Yeah, if any panelists have any, we'll leave some closing remarks to panelists. If you want to, or if there's anybody who has any other questions.
I have an answer for a question.
Yes, yes, go for it.
On my chest. Susie had asked if there would be an interest in forming a member interest group for Native Americans in the academy. So 2 years ago, before the pandemic, I attempted that with, I have another coworker who's also Navajo, and she's our inpatient clinical dietitian, and we were talking about it. That was pre-pandemic, and we were kind of excited to try to restart that, because from what I understood, there was one like maybe a decade ago. And I just don't think there was momentum that kept it up. And so we were trying to restart it, and we reached out to the A&D, and we got all the kind of like the paperwork together. But like I said, you know, the pandemic happened and that was the end of that. So we have thought about it. And at the same time, there are some things that I disagree with that come from the A&D, and I really wasn't, after going through these whole 2 years of things, it was just, I don't think I'd be comfortable restarting it again. Just because I don't know, I really don't agree with having the graduate requirement for the dietitians, because I feel like that's just going to marginalize or what do you call it? Isolate the dietetics profession even further, because people like me and other people of color don't, like, we need to make money. You know, we want to get into the field right away, and we need, you know, we don't come from those privileged backgrounds where we can just borrow from our parents to go to an unpaid internship. And I don't feel like there's enough work being done on trying to make the internships more equitable. And so that's just like another aside that I have. And that's kind of where that's at with possibly starting the new member interest group for natives. They're all controversial, but just got to throw that out there.
This is Susie Baxter, and thank you for your answer. And I've enjoyed this. I would like to share with you that I am currently in the process and have been for the past like 3 or 4 years, forming a new member interest group within the Academy for members with disabilities. And the process took a lot more time and was a lot more involved than I anticipated. But we're actually in our planning year now, and we will begin accepting new members in the spring and then officially launch June 1st with the fiscal year. So I want to share your misery of the time that it takes and the master's requirement. I also want to encourage you and let you know that there are people, many of whom are on this webinar, but not everyone could join the webinar or even knew about it, who are very interested in helping and would love to collaborate in whatever way we can. You already heard from Jane White from Critical Dietetics. I'm very interested in helping you, and I'm willing to do whatever. I don't know the best methods for reaching Native Americans. That I would need to learn that, and you know that best. But if you do want to form a member interest group, or if you want to do an educational session at FNCE, or put on more of these webinars, I'm happy to help you in any way that I can.
Well,
I'm very interested in it.
I will take you up on the offer, but let's email.
Okay.
Because I do, it would be good to present either at FNCE. I am looking at presenting at Aspen on a project we had at our hospital, which I'm very proud of. And actually Aspen reached out to us to become a Malnutrition Awareness Week ambassador. And so that was really exciting because we had a lot of I didn't even get to talk about that, but I'm very proud of my team over at the hospital for doing a lot of work in malnutrition awareness. And that's something that we're looking at as far as like trying to present to Aspen. We did try presenting the same project. We submitted an abstract to FNCE last year and it wasn't accepted. So we were really bummed about that. But now that we kind of haven't more of a bridge with Aspen now, I think that's kind of the way we want to go. So, but anything you can do to help as well, kind of elevate the status of Native dietitians, and just kind of, again, going back to that representation and showing that, dietitians who identify as Native are doing really great things in their communities, and we need to celebrate that. And as much as, I think it's important to just keep talking about it, because we don't know it's an issue until we bring awareness, And the issue right now is we don't have enough Indigenous dietitians who are able to stay with the community a little bit more longer than non-Native dietitians. And so I think it's just really important to just keep talking about it, and then keep inviting Native panelists and have them talk about what's important to them and what are the issues they're facing in their own community. So that's just I want to throw that out there.
Thank you, Danae. Thank you for the question, Susie. We are coming up on time, everybody. So I just wanted to let you know that we did put surveys into the chat box. There's one for students. There's one for just participants. If you could just fill it out, 3 questions, that would be really, really appreciated. And if Dylan, if you could go ahead and ways to stay connected. These are some of the ways you can stay connected with Cynthia, Alvina, and Danae. Please, if you have Instagram, follow Danae. She's been killing it with the meme game, and the TikTok videos. I've been loving it so far. So
I've had a lot of inspiration in the past 2 weeks, so
you're doing good. It's definitely getting all the youngins. So
that's the point. That's the point.
Yes.
We need more native dietitians. So I'm like, you young folks like TikTok. So.
Right. Next thing you need to do is just add some dance moves into there.
That's one thing I will not do. But who knows? Maybe next year.
Yeah. So thank you everybody so much for joining us this evening. And I really want to thank you, Danae, Alvina, and Cynthia, Achat, and Sago for making this possible. I really appreciate the words you guys shared tonight, and the knowledge, and just hearing your story, because that's one thing you just need to hear sometimes, is other people's story to get you through maybe like a obstacle that's happening lately, or so I really want to thank you guys for joining us this evening. And that is all from my end. Thank you, everybody. And
Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you, Chelsea, for putting this together.
Thank you. I'm just so happy you guys made it.
Yeah.